Hey,
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good. Just getting back into my exercise regime, actually. So today we're going to talk about maximizing your productivity, right? And I know you're a productivity nut. I hate to say that, but you are. So I've been learning a lot about you, about productivity, actually, from you. And lean, like that's what you kind of operate on, right? So
Yeah,
we're going to talk about mindset, exercise, and changing one's habits to become more productive.
absolutely. And I guess it's around, it's one of those things. I never really thought I was a productivity nut until I think back. And actually, even if I look back at some old recommendations, I've always had this piece. It was like your work rate is legendary. And I never really recognized it for myself until I kind of look back now and people were like, you did that today? It's like I thought that would have been a week's worth of work. I'm like, oh, maybe that's my problem. I don't give myself I'm constantly challenging myself to do more. And actually, somebody gave some lovely feedback before, which was like your ability to like juggle being a single mum and running a business, writing books, doing blogs, and also being a good friend makes us all think you just have more hours in the day than everybody else. And I was like, no, I just always feel like I've not done enough. I think that drive around lack of awareness of what you do has probably been the thing that has pushed me on, which is like, oh, I've not done enough yet. I must try harder because I'm not being good enough at any of these things. And therefore you just keep going.
Right, right. So in terms of actually mindset, right? You know, exercise and diet and rest are all really important. And I was kind of just looking at an old blog that I wrote about 4 years ago. I just mentioned this to you, right? And actually, how as adults we apparently need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per day. Yeah, and I kind of looked on this sleep calculator. I looked on the National Sleep Foundation's website, basically, and kind of had a look at that. And it's been very difficult recently, obviously, for people because of added stress levels and stuff like that. But I think for me, I don't know. I've just been feeling really tired recently. I think it's probably the weather. I think that's probably got a lot to do with it in my mind.
Yeah, and I think as well, it depends on what we're doing in the day. So, I've always found if I do a day of training, whether that's delivering training or receiving training, I'm always significantly more tired than if I have a day of doing stuff I already know how to do. And I guess it's because we're tapping into a different part of our brain that's taking up more stuff because it's less known to us, it's new, and therefore we're going to have to think about it. I do love the whole 7 to 9 hours. If somebody would like to let my little girl know that, I would be extremely grateful, because she certainly does not think that mummy needs 7 hours worth of sleep. God bless her. Not that I change it for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to mindset, right? We've been delving into this topic and how we can actually take control of our routines, and obviously, changing habits is kind of fits into the mindset thing as well, really. So it's kind of difficult when you've been doing things for a certain amount of time to actually change, right? They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, yeah, and I think. But that is a question of mindset as well, isn't it? Because you've either got a growth mindset, or you think you know everything, and then you're fixed in your mentality and also in your actions as well, right?
Yeah, and I think you can teach an old dog new tricks. It's just about how much patience it's going to take, and it might take a little bit longer because when we're stuck in a habit, we've got so used to it, we convince ourselves that actually we can't change, we can't do anything different. It's going to be too hard. It's going to take too long, and it does take a long time. It took us a long time to form the habit in the first place, and I think that's sometimes the challenge. Is it took us a long time to form the habit. We're comfortable in the habit, and then we try and change it, and it takes quite a while to change. You have to keep repeating yourself, and you'll get it wrong, you'll get it right. You have to keep going, and but before long, you create a new habit. So I would have been convinced a couple of weeks ago that there was absolutely no time in my day for me to fit in anything else. And there's an old study. It was, I believe it was a Harvard professor. It was a psychology class, and he took in a empty jar, and he started off and he put the golf balls in the jar, and he said, would everybody agree that this jar is now full? And everyone was like, yeah, there's definitely full. There's nowhere else you can put in it. And then he added in some marbles, and he shook it, and the marbles dropped into the spaces that were in between the golf balls. And he went, right, so now would everybody say that this jar is full? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Now the jar is full. And then he poured in some sand, and the sand obviously filled the gaps between the golf balls and the marbles. And he said, okay, well, now would everybody agree that this jar is absolutely full? There's nothing else that they can put in it. Well, absolutely, that is true. And finally, he took a can of beer and he poured the beer over the top, which soaked into the sand and continued to kind of fill the jar. And he was like, even when you think something is full, there is still an opportunity for you to add something else. And I've heard somebody else say that even when you think there's nothing else you can fit into your life, there's always time for some beer. Probably one of the versions that I took from it. But it was around saying, actually, what we need to do is put in the really important things, the golf ball. And then we need to put in some of the things that we would like to do as well, which are the marbles. Then we need to find time for the people that we love, which is the sand. And then there's always time to add something else to relax. But it's about looking at things differently and seeing where we can add them in. So, you know, I'm now 2 weeks into my new attempt at losing the lockdown lumber, as I like to call it, and recognizing that I'm actually going to have to go outside into the public, and therefore I probably need to have thought more carefully about, you know, how the habits that I formed during lockdown that I didn't have before. So I wouldn't have dreamt of, like, you know, attacking Scott's biscuit barrel quite as often as I've found appropriate during lockdown. And now I'm trying to find a way of kind of pulling that back. And actually, we've found a way to put a dance app into every day and to start building in more steps. And if you'd have told me 2 weeks ago that I would be able to do that every day and stick to it, I would have told you were crazy, because my life was already busy. And yet, actually, here we are, two weeks in, we're doing it, we're loving it. I mean, she is my little personal trainer. She spends most of the time stood at the side of me going, no, mummy, jump. It's like, I'm jumping. Clearly not well enough. But actually, we've found the time to fit it in, and all of a sudden you're changing your output, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think when it comes to productivity, it's certainly something that takes a bit of time, like, to get used to, right? And, you know, to be more productive, sometimes we actually need downtime. Yeah. And, you know, I've been studying this for quite a while, probably not as long as you, Kim, because you are, like, absolutely productivity nut extraordinaire, right? Because you've done, like, your lean practitioner course, and, you know, but when it comes to this, they've proven that actually working more than 55 hours a week is actually non-productive. That's one thing. And also, they seem to, there's a lot of evidence that says that actually, if you work in sprints, so for example, you do like 52 minutes of really focused effort, and then you have a 17-minute break. And it's something like the Pomodoro method. It's similar. And I found that those things are very, 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 very useful.
Yeah, I guess that's, and Elaine, so we are going to come to your question in a second. But I guess that's one of the things, that's kind of like the agile mindset, which is you take the biggest problem and you sprint to the fastest answer, but then you actually have to take that step back and do the next one. And it's about looking at it and recognizing those moments where we're just not productive. And we do this every day. I mean, we work together every day, God bless you, where, you know, we'll get to that point where it's like, do you know what, right now we're not being productive, and we're not going to be productive because we're tired. We don't really know the answer. We were going to be much more productive if we actually just go, let's stop, let's go and do something else, let's go for a walk. And that's one of the things we've built in, isn't it, to our working day now, which is actually midway through the day when we get to those moments, it's like, do you know what, let's plug our headphones in, let's move from Zoom to an audio, and let's go for a walk out in the fresh air and just brainstorm and just chat, but just dial it up, change it, make it something different. And we come back and we're significantly more productive. Whereas I think sometimes we can get ourselves into that mindset that says, I haven't done what I said I was going to do, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to force myself to do it, even if that means tomorrow I'm going to come back and have to redo it, because it was basically hopeless because I wasn't in the right mindset and my purpose wasn't well aligned. And I think we just have to be more forgiving of ourselves. And Ellen, sorry, forgive me. I called you Elaine earlier, so please do forgive me. But you've kind of mentioned about, quarantine and the impact on relationships, both marital and non-marital, and it has been huge. I know lots of people that unfortunately have found this time really, really difficult. And I have, numerous debates with friends of mine, and it's been a bit of a balance, which is, on the one hand, some people have said, well, it must be really hard for you. You're a single mum locked in on your own with a toddler. Well, she's not a toddler, she's a preschooler. And that must be really hard. And it's like, well, actually, no, to an extent, it's been really easy. We've become a little bit of a team. There's just the two of us. I have nobody else vying for my attention or wanting me to do things for them, apart from this little person. And when she goes to bed, which is relatively early, I get some time back. Now, don't get me wrong, that can sometimes be a bit boring as well, because you've got time back on your own, looking at box sets or repainting your nails, whatever comes to kind of take my mind off it. But I think it's been very difficult to kind of almost fall out with yourself, because there's only just you, so there's only so much. Whereas I think, if we think about the frustrations, the things that we're missing, the loss of our lives as they were, and the fact that we're not able to make the same choices that we were able to make before, and we're coming out the other side of that. But when we take away our choices, we start to look at the things that we can control, to take over from the things that we can't control. And I think that is unfortunately having a really large impact on relationships. I'm seeing so many more people that are unfortunately risking relationship breakup as a result of the pressure that they have felt under as part of this quarantine, a part of this lockdown. And it seems to be impacting people almost on either side of the spectrum. It's either making their relationship significantly stronger, or it's actually putting it under undue pressure and causing it to start to see some signs of strain. And I suppose for me, not having that relationship, it's very difficult to be able to comprehend the pressure that people must be under, and how best to help. And I suppose with all these things, it's trying to find that space to be able to talk about things and to frame them in the right way, because we're all feeling, I guess, a little bit at risk. I often share this book, as you know now, which is Crucial Conversations. It talks about those moments in our life when a conversation becomes crucial. And by that, what we mean is that there is some emotion that's pulled into it. And that's because either one or both people are fearful. They're fearful of being sold to. They're fearful of being let down. They're fearful of being hurt. Whatever it is, we're coming at it from a position of fear. And actually, while we're in that place, what happens is we respond with either violence or silence. So we either get very aggressive, very assertive, or we go silent and withdraw, and neither one of them helps. But if we can learn to frame the conversation and say, do you know what, I'm really conflicted about this, and actually I don't really want to have this conversation. I probably want to stick my head in the oven than have it. But I really want this to work, and I know that to do that, we need to talk about it. Once you start to frame it, you take away the fear for yourself and the fear for the other person, and you can actually go back and have the conversation. And it's easier to say than it is to do. But I have actually used this in numerous relationships, and I promise it works. And maybe that, I don't know, maybe that might help. It's an area that I guess I can't really comment on with any real credibility, bearing in mind I've had 3 divorces, a stalker, and I'm a single parent. So maybe we should just say, don't follow my advice.
But no, I think back to the exercise thing, right? Like, I think we can demand too much from ourselves, I've been practicing like Tai Chi as a martial art for like 24 years, nearly 25 years. And, most days has been kind of 1 hour minimum, maybe up to like 4 hours sometimes training, right? And having those moments where you aren't looking at your phone, you aren't on Zoom, you're not watching TV, and you're not doing all of these things, and having that space is actually sometimes when the magic happens, right? And but I get burnout, and actually having a good break. I mean, when you're exercising like every day, year on year, day in, day out, right? They actually say that, bodybuilders, like I think it's every 12 weeks, they recommend that if you're lifting, heavy weights, you should take like a week out, and then you go back on the next week. When you're back, you basically start lifting at like 20, I think it's 75% of what you were lifting before. Yeah. And those breaks actually give you more strength, but actually, like, mixing up your exercise routine is really helpful. And I live on a hill, right? So, sometimes I'll go down and I'll go for a walk, and then I have to walk up the hill on the way back, right? And I'm used to having like an hour's walk, but the other day I did like half hour, and it killed me more than an hour, right? And it's just like, actually mixing up these things is really important. So soon I'm going to get my skipping rope out and like start doing some skipping and stuff. And I think anyone that's kind of just used to doing one sport and one type of exercise, like, you won't believe the benefits that you'll get just by mixing it up and actually doing some other things as well, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's not just about how we exercise. I think it's about in our life. One of the things that I think is finding that thing that just gives you a change of scenery. So whenever I can't come up with an answer, whether that's something that's going on in my personal life, something that's going on in business, where I just can't get through something, personally, I go and cook. So I either cook or bake, because for me that is it's such a therapeutic way of being, because you just are in the moment. You've got to be present with whatever it is that you're doing. And I'm horrendous. I never follow a recipe. So I'm always like opening the cupboard and going, I'll just throw this in. And then if it goes really well, I'm like, I can't really what I put in there. I'm going to have to try and work it out, see if I can make it again another time. But I have some of my best solutions doing that, because I know that is somewhere where I actually feel relaxed. I feel really comfortable. And it's a passion that I'm passing on to my little girl. So now we get some amazing moments where we get to cook and bake together. And, I think we're well loved by, nursery and my parents and neighbours, because we then take it round to them, because if not, we would be the size of a housing estate. Because if I'm ever stressed, I go into cooking central. Let's just start, baking bread and making chutney and things. It's not good for the diet. But I think it's finding those parts that say, actually, this for me is good therapy. And it's about mixing it up. It's about giving ourselves chance, because sometimes that's what I need. Other times what I need is to just plug in an audible book and get myself a cup of tea and just switch off from the world. And so right about now, I'm not going to expect anything from myself. And it's taken me a lot of years to get to that place of doing something. And Ellen, you're right. I love the benefits of nature. So, me and my little girl, we do a walk every day, or at least even at the weekend, we did it in the rain. Bless her, she was like head to toe in her waterproofs. But it was just being able to get out there and see that we live in a beautiful world, and there's so much to be grateful for, and there's so much to see. And I think I'm learning to love life, looking at it through her eyes. She's 4.5. And the wonder within which she looks at everything, be that she wants to know what all the flowers are called, which is a bit of a test of my nature skills, because, I'm not always that great at them, but I'm learning. And I think sometimes you do, we have been regularly now taking that break, haven't we? Just getting out there and saying, what, get outside, get some fresh air, move away from sitting ourselves in this desk, and give ourselves a chance to just reconnect with the world that's around us has been a real eye-opener for me. How about you, Nat?
Oh, absolutely. I think fresh air is a really big one, right? And I live by the sea, so I walk down the hill 5 minutes, and I'm right by the sea. So, and that fresh air is just amazing. And I've got some lovely parks around here and stuff like that. So yeah, I love nature. I grew up climbing trees in the middle of the woods, right? So compared to a lot of kids growing up these days, like we were really lucky, right? Like that, we were kind of the generation that, you know, we just went out and played in the woods and did what we wanted, you know. And I know you've had a similar kind of experience. Kim.
And it's so important, isn't it? It's like with my little girl now. I mean, we're doing bribery and corruption this week, so poor parenting. I have my hands up, which is trying to get her to go to bed at night. And it's like, do you know what, sweetie? If you go to bed for mummy and you have a good night's sleep and you stay in bed, then at the weekend, mummy will get us tickets to your favourite National Trust place, so that we can go in the park and we can go and run and play in the trees and we can go and, you know, waist deep in the lake, because it's, you know, that's important. It's important that, you know, and I lived a blessed childhood where you got to do all of those. And, you know, now I look at it and we used to, at one point we had a rope bridge and we used to like rope swing, and we used to do our best to swing across the road and see if we could land in the ditch on the other side. I mean, you go grey, isn't it? The thought of my little girl doing that. And yet when I was a kid, that seemed like a perfectly appropriate way. I'll be clear, it wasn't a main road, it was a side street, and we lived in the country, but we thought that that was amazingly cool, and something that we would do. And I think it's helping ensure that we remain with that balance, isn't it? And giving our kids that chance to kind of go out and do some of those things, as well as, you know, learn all the other things that they need to learn to make the most of the life that they've been given.
Right. But so when it comes to like changing habits, yeah, that is a really difficult one. And like, I mean, we decided we were going to stop drinking. I think I decided maybe like a day before you, and you were like, oh, I'm going to stop drinking for a while. And I was like, oh, I started doing that yesterday. So I'm like one day ahead of you at the moment.
Yeah.
And we're well on to our second week without drinking any booze. Right. But like, changing habits is a really tough one, yeah, especially when it comes to alcohol, coffee, eating the wrong foods, not exercising. And, you know, I mean, like when I started Tai Chi, right, like it's very similar process to actually changing a habit, right? With Tai Chi, when you first start, like it's something that you don't know about, you don't know anything about it. It's very difficult to learn. Because you have to listen very carefully and you have to remember what you've been taught and everything else, right? And so basically, when I first started out, I was like, oh, this is really hard. But then eventually it built over time. And that's the same with a lot of these habits. But like stopping drinking alcohol, it depends if you're an alcoholic or not, right? Like, fortunately, neither of us are alcoholics, so we could actually just stop just like this and not have like withdrawal symptoms and whatever else, which is what people get. But what's this question here, Ellen? Let's have a look here. One more question. Selfish in my life means taking care of self. Vital. I wouldn't call that being selfish. I would call that being smart, personally. And yeah, adults definitely need nature and humor. Self-absorbed, no, I don't know. I think actually being happy with time with yourself is a really important skill, actually, if I'm perfectly honest. And when I grew up, I used to play in the woods for hours, like on my own, you know, and just have fun in my little world, right? And like I think that's probably what makes me a little bit more easy with the lockdowns and whatever else, because actually I'm at home with my own company. So
but I think it's balance, isn't it? I think it's everything in balance. You know, I spent a lot of years being very, very poor at self-care. So I wouldn't ever have any time for me. That would always be the thing that went on the back burner. And I never understood that old adage that, you know, you should put the life mask on yourself first before you put it on somebody else. I was like, surely you just put it on the other person because they need it. And then it's only been, you know, the last couple of years that I've realized if I don't put it on myself first, I won't survive long enough to help them. And actually my biggest driver in life is to help, is to leave things better than I found them. And therefore that element, that balance of having some time that is self-care, being able to say no and not leap in, you know, if somebody's, you know, if somebody needs your help, obviously you want to do your best to help them. But if that is going to come at a cost that you can't give up, you have to also be kind to yourself. You know, that's happened to me recently, where it's awful to think that somebody is in pain and you don't want to leave them in pain. But I also realized that actually I couldn't help them without actually harming myself. And therefore I can point them in the right direction to get the pain. But at that point, I need to, step away, because if not, if I allowed myself to get damaged, then who's going to be there for my little girl, and who's going to be there for the other people that need me? And it was a really hard one to navigate around. Is that selfish? Is that self-absorbed? Or is that about trying to do the right thing for all the people that you are here to try and support and care for? And I think it's a balancing act that we're always going to have to keep questioning. But I think as long as we keep having that conversation and making conscious choice, I think for me that's been my biggest learn in the last 4 years, has been having to make conscious choice, recognizing that whatever I do has a consequence, and I need to do my best to understand what that consequence is and be comfortable I can live with it before I make the choice. And that sometimes does mean selfishly saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. And I'd love to, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people aren't ready to change, and they just want to hand you this massive kind of problem. Like, it's like, oh, here's this problem, Kim. You take this problem and you go and let it mess with you, right? And it's like, well, actually, like, it's not my circus and they're not my monkeys, right? And that's kind of the old Polish saying, which I think it comes from the Bible, actually, that saying. But so when it comes to like changing these habits, right? First of all, you need to be aware of the habit that you've actually got. Because if you're not self-aware of the habits that you have that are damaging you, how are you going to firstly change those, right? Like that's like, fundamental. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. But I think also we have to be passionately compassionate to ourselves. So we are compassionate to other people and often not that compassionate to ourselves. So, we suddenly say, I'm going to be really good and I'm going to eat really healthily and I'm going to lose the lockdown lumber. But then, creep off to the fridge and have a chocolate button, or have one of Scarlett's biscuits when we're sharing. And I would have berated myself for a long time. And now it's like, actually, do you know what? It was just a minor slip. And don't allow that, because I used to berate myself. I'd then go, it's now a bad day. I've ruined the whole day. So I may as well just keep going. And that's when we fall off the wagon, for want of a better word, the biscuit wagon in my particular case. Whereas actually, if you just go, do you know what? You've had a biscuit. That doesn't make it a bad day. That just means it's all about balance. And I think we've just got to be compassionate, because if this were any of my friends, if they were like, oh, I was doing really well, Kim, and I've just had this, it's like, let yourself off, love. It's one. As long as one doesn't become 2, 3, 4, 15, as long as you get back on it again tomorrow, recognize it took you a long time to build the habit, and therefore it's going to take you a while to break the habit. It's like what we do with our mindset. If we think about, what we do with imposter syndrome, it took us a long time to create those statements that tell us that we're not good enough. And therefore, it's going to take us a long time to create new ones. But every time that we have a slip, every time that one of those old thoughts comes back, rather than berating ourselves, it's about going, yeah, I get that, but it's okay, because I know how to overcome it again. And sorry, Ellen, you've got another one. So self-absorbed in your language means there's no compassion for others. Self-care is what we're talking about. Absolutely. So for me, there is a real balance. So self-care is not about putting myself ahead of others, but putting myself equal to others, so that I can give as much compassion to me as I give to them. It's not instead of, it's as well as, which allows me to be much more balanced. Whereas before, I wasn't doing any of that, and I actually made myself really ill a few times. I've ended up in intensive care because I wasn't very good at allowing myself to have what I needed to enable me to still be there for other people. And you're right, learning to say no. No was a word that didn't come in my vocabulary unless it was to say no to myself. It's like, no, you don't need that. These people need you. You've got to be able to go and do that. And actually, it was a really, really hard lesson to learn, and one I'm still learning. I sometimes now will still say yes to things that I really should have said no to, and they bite you in the backside. And actually, all of that is our learning curve, I guess.
Very much so. I mean, we were talking to Garen Kilpatrick the other day, one of my old business partners, and we worked on Next Level podcast together a few years ago. And he was basically saying, because he's big into weightlifting, like I think he actually didn't he deadlift like 750 pounds or something, like it was ridiculous kind of amount. But he was saying, you know, what you don't measure, you can't kind of control, right? So, you know, whenever you're taking on like a new exercise regime, or you're trying to change habits, you need to measure where you were versus, you know, where you're heading and where you want to get to, and then you need to compare the results over time. And you know, I think that's really, really important, most certainly, with all of these things. Whether you're, you know, holding yoga postures, or, you know, skipping or running or doing weights or whatever, if you're not measuring, you know, the time and the intensity and this kind of stuff, how are you going to improve, right? You've got nothing to kind of measure, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's giving yourself time. You know, it took us a long time to build the habit and get where we want. You know, I look at mine now and go, we've been in lockdown a year. It's taken me a year to get to this point. So I can't expect I'm like, you know, 2 weeks into my new regime and therefore I should be back to where I was a year ago. That's not realistic. So actually what you need to be able to do is try and just be a little bit more realistic about what it is. That doesn't mean to say don't push yourself and don't try really hard, but recognize, am I actually holding myself to account against a realistic goal? Was it likely I could lose a year's worth of weight in 2 weeks? No, not if I wanted to do it in a healthy and safe manner. And therefore actually tracking your progress, and Robert, you're right, I love it. It was Einstein that says if you can measure it, you should track it. And it's so true. And I think there was somebody else, I can't remember whose quote it was, but what gets measured gets done. And that's true. You know, when we start to measure things, we do them because we're paying attention to them. And I think it's all about that conscious choice. It's about making sure that we are choosing the actions that we take, and then acknowledging if we get it wrong, we acknowledge we got it wrong, we apologize for it, we learn from it, and we do something else. If we get it right, we acknowledge it and we congratulate ourselves for doing so. And it's about taking our world and making our world be more balanced, I think, because that's going to be how we keep that positive mindset, because life does throw us the odd plot twist. You know, it chucks us the odd thing that derails us slightly from what we had planned. But if we search for the rainbow, we can find them.
Yeah, definitely. And also, you know, building these new habits, apparently, I think it actually takes 30 days to build a new habit. Is that, am I quoting someone's, is that right? I seem to remember that.
I was going to say, I've heard differing ones. So between 21 and 30, they say. They also say it can take 90 times of doing something for it to become habitual. So you have to kind of keep repeating. And there's lots of different schools of thought, but all of them talk about 2 weeks for a new habit. Thanks, Ellen. All of them talk about the fact that it is about the repetition. It's about continuing to keep doing it, because we're trying to change a belief that we've created, and we can change our beliefs, but we change them in the same way we built them in the first place, which is through repetition.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to go, but thank you, Robert and Ellen, for tuning in, and everyone else who's kind of dropped in and watched this. And we're always here if you want to like drop us any comments and stuff. But, you know, whatever it is you're trying to do, you just got to put one foot in front of the other, right? Like Rome was not built in a day, is what they say. And, you know, it doesn't matter where you're at. You can move forwards to achieve whatever it is that you are looking to achieve. But I think having a plan, being kind to yourself, and following the right guidance is always going to be great.
Absolutely. They say, you know, plan the work and work the plan. And if you do that, then you can make a real impact. But until next time, thank you so much for your kindness in listening to us, and take care and enjoy the week.
Thank you.